Alright guys, welcome back to F1 News. More drama for 2026 as F1's former technical director suggests these upcoming regulations are compromised before they have even got off the ground, largely because the FIA listened too much to one of the engine manufacturers when they were designing these regs over the last couple of seasons. There are several hints that manufacturer could well be Mercedes, and if it's true that the FIA have listened too much, arguably, to that team in this design process, are these regulations over before they have even begun? Plenty to get into. Very much into your thoughts in the comments. Hit the like button if you enjoy, subscribe if you're new. As always, we are going to begin with this image because, if you guys are unfamiliar, this is the proposed Grand Prix circuit in Qiddiya. So Qiddiya is a new city which is currently getting built. I think it's a couple of hours south of Riyadh in Saudi Arabia. Now, there have been talk for some years that the Saudis actually want two Grand Prix, one in Jeddah, one in Qiddiya. The more likely outcome is that they will get to one and it will either rotate or they will move it to Qiddiya more permanently. Effectively, Qiddiya is the Las Vegas of Saudi Arabia. That's kind of the intention. So they're building this massive complex in the desert, and this is the proposed track. You guys may be familiar with this image, which is supposedly one of the corners raised massively off the grounds. We know that basically it's turn one at Austin, but elevated artificially, as it were. Could cause some controversy. It's been a talking point for a long time. It's still quite a way out from completion, but just worthy to keep in mind that this is moving, and this is moving quite quickly. So this is a pretty old image of the theme park that they are building here in Qiddiya. I think it's maybe a Six Flags or something, whatever it is. It's like the first thing that they're really building in this city. You guys can see what it looks like in the background. This, on the left-hand side here, is where the track is meant to go around this theme park. And we actually now have an image today of what it currently looks like. So this is obviously much further down the line. I think there's been a lot of talk about this roller coaster and how wild it is, but I don't know too much about that. All I do know is this is the theme park in a far more built-up version as we have it today, and we already have, as you guys can see in the foreground, where the track is meant to run, right alongside this roller coaster. So maybe it won't be in operation when there's a Grand Prix underway. I'm not so sure what they're up to. But anyway, that's your update on that front. The other update is on our team logos. We talked yesterday, Mercedes are changing their logo. We've got Toyota Gazoo Racing, Haas for the new season. We also have the new Williams logo with their new W, which is more, let's say, aligned with their history. Lots of talk about Williams for the upcoming season, I think for good reason. Saw an interesting video that the high performance guys, Jake Humphreys, did with James Vowles. It's, they recorded that a year and a half ago now, but they put it out on their channel because, well, looking behind the scenes at what Williams were doing then to try to build the foundations for a successful campaign. They're not expecting to win anything this upcoming season. They are, however, expecting to take a step forward, and if what we're going to discuss in a few minutes on this Mercedes engine is true, there might be something to that. However, Red Bull have also updated their logo. This is their old logo at the bottom, the new one at the top. It's basically the same, but there are some similar trends here. What Mercedes have done with a little bit of gradient, a little bit of design, Red Bull have followed suit, and it's now just white. Right? Oracle is just purely white, no embossing. It's the same with the racing at the bottom. But the key changes, of course, you'll notice is the Red Bull, right? It was no longer outlined from 2016, I think. We'll have a look at some of the images in a second. But the outline of the Red Bull in white is officially back. So whether you like that or not, this is the old version, 2025. This is the new version, 2026. It's worth noting the last time that Red Bull had this was back in 2015. This was the Red Bull car from the 2015 season, the RB11, and you can see Red Bull outlined in white. This is actually one of my favorite Red Bull liveries ever. I actually just love this livery in general, even just if I had to do a tier list in F1, the Infinity purple Red Bull, I always did love it, and obviously they moved away from that the following year, but this is the RB11 with the Red Bull with the white outline, the big bull on the back, the same with the Red Bull on the front, and everywhere it was in the white outline. They moved away from that in 2016. This is the RB12 from 2016, and you can see that the outline is gone, right? It's just the yellow and the red. This is effectively where it started, right? This era of these Red Bull liveries, which have basically looked like this for the last decade. So we've had 10 years of this Red Bull livery in its form. Now we've got Red Bull changing their logo back to this, which has obviously got people talking about whether a logo, well, a design more similar to this could be possible, or even just a move away from what we have had for the last decade, which is probably about time that Red Bull do something else, but I wouldn't necessarily count on it. But even if it is basically the same, which this is not massively dissimilar, obviously, apart from the purple of the Infinity, but at least it will probably be outlined in white again on the car, which maybe could inspire some more special liveries that we have seen the White Bulls in the past. Ferrari confirmed. Scuderia Ferrari. Thank you, Zhou Guanyu. So he's been their reserve driver for this most recent year. That is now no longer the case. So Zhou is moving on. What will Ferrari do instead? Good question. They, of course, have plenty of candidates for this role. The more interesting question, I think, for many is, where does Zhou go next? Because Cadillac put this out today. They tweeted out this like cat with a wry smile emoji, or whatever you want to call that. They also put this on their Instagram, reflections of the future, eyes emoji, and they've got this image of what, you know, can only be a cat, right, with these eyes. Now they say 5th of the 1st, 2026, so I mean, obviously in Britain we would call that the the 1st of May, but I imagine they don't mean the 1st of May, and they mean in a couple of days' time, although people are questioning that in the comments. But what's notable here is if you look at the bottom left-hand side, you'll see that, I mean, I can even probably zoom in a little bit for you. You can see the Cadillac logo and you can see the number 24. Now, the number 24 is Zhou Guanyu's number. And it looks like this could be the option. So Cadillac, we know their driver lineup, it's Perez, it's Bottas for the upcoming season. They need a reserve driver, at least for the time being. There's talk about Colton Herta in the future, but that, of course, can't happen yet for super license reasons and others. So Zhou to Cadillac, look, it does make some sense. Cadillac Ferrari powered. Zhou can go over there, still has that kind of Ferrari relationship to a degree. Zhou, you know, the cat thing is kind of strange, but I guess Zhou loves cats, so there's that, I suppose. Cadillac, maybe, but like there's 24 in the image, so yeah, I mean, it's a teaser, so I mean, it's a good teaser, I guess, but if it is Zhou joining, then it's pretty obvious, right? I mean, putting the number 24 here is a bit of a giveaway, no? Anyway, let's get back into 2026, because the factories are back open. They were mandated closed over the Christmas New Year period, but as of yesterday, the factories are back in business, and well, the talk is that the factories will be open 24 hours a day. Work weeks will be 60 hours plus for all the staff, especially for Aston Martin, because apparently they're somewhat behind the curve. Enrico Cardile joined relatively late. Apparently they've not yet passed the crash test for the FIA, so that's something they've still got to do. But it's all guns blazing for the start of the new season at this point. We'll just quickly mention this. This was like an ad that the race did for Shell or something with all the logos on it. But there was actually quite an interesting thing here where Shell describe, or Ferrari describe, what these fuels actually look like. Well, not what they look like precisely, but as we've discussed over the last few days, the fuels next year have to be sustainable, whether that is synthetic e-fuels or whether that is, let's say, biofuel from various, what I think she describes as feedstocks. But she actually has a couple of like vials here of what they could be using. So either paper residues, or they have residue like from the wood industry, or they can use residues from crops, or I think that's even municipal waste or recycled plastic. So anyway, that's what Ferrari are doing basically with Shell. Aramco and others, maybe Petronas, are taking a very different approach, whereas Ferrari are going for a far more bio-derived mechanism here. And basically the FIA says that as long as it's 65% more sustainable than regular fuel, then basically you can do what you want. So there's going to be a lot of differences in fuel compounds and like the way that the molecules are actually structured next season. There will be some performance difference in there, whether that's good or bad for Ferrari. We talked the other day, it could be good, but who really knows at this point? But the regulations are changing a lot for next season. The drivers have not been happy with the aero side of the puzzle. You ask Max Verstappen, yes, he dominated this era of regs, but did he like any of the cars? Not really. Like, he didn't, well, his back, his spine certainly didn't like them. And I know that porpoising disappeared, but the guys are still bouncing around corners at times. You're still hitting the ground, even if the car wasn't having the same porpoising effect as it was at the start of the regulations. On a straight, you wouldn't necessarily be bouncing, but through corners, when there's undulation, because they had to run the cars so low and so stiff, they absolutely would. Gasly said, physically for our backs, you couldn't do that for a whole career. It's not sustainable. So I think they're happy we're moving away. Are we going to go back to 2021 or 2017 era, shall we say, ride heights? Possibly we will be somewhere in between. But the big drama has really been on the engine, at least so far. I'm sure there'll be aero trickery that we'll be discussing in the coming weeks once we get some of the pictures of these machines as well. But for now, it's all speculation on the engine, the fuel suppliers. These are the lubricant suppliers as well, which I thought was pretty interesting. But the main drama has been, from the engine side, whether we're actually going to be in a dominant situation for a Mercedes or for some other manufacturer. They can pull some levers, right? They can change things. Nicholas Tombazis of the FIA says, if overtaking is too difficult, we have levers to make it easier. This is like, energy deployment, how much you can deploy in certain situations, the way the active aero has to sit. There's things they can mess around with. But the most interesting article today, with comments from one of the former top guys in the decision-making process for these regulations, came out of Pat Simmons. So this is Pat Simmons. He used to be F1's F1 management, which is crucial to this conversation, their technical director. He's now gone, and he's done all sorts of work at F1 over several decades. He's now gone to work for Cadillac. So he's in the Cadillac project for the upcoming year. Basically, he said he was fed up of working with F1 and not making any decisions, or certainly not getting things the way that he felt was necessary. So Pat Simmons says, we ended up with a camel, which is somewhat confusing, but we'll discuss what he means here in a second. So he conceived the 2022 chassis regs. He's been a crucial component of these conversations in recent years, and he's recently left F1 management to go and join Cadillac's program. Now, F1 management is one piece of the puzzle. That's Liberty Media, that's Formula One, that's the media side of the sport. FIA, that's the governing body. They kind of make the rules, but F1 also want to have their say. He says it was a little bit of frustration that Formula One management were getting less and less involved in the regulations. Very much the FIA and things like the 26 power unit was not what I wanted it to be. When we did the 22 car, we listened to what the teams were saying, but we ruled them with a firm hand. We said, okay, we're listening, but we are going to do this. We took some of their input. We knew that each one of them had an agenda. This is the advantage of me spending so many years as a competitor. We were quite rigid in what we wanted. Now, that's kind of interesting, right? And it's also very self-evident. Every team will try to politic, and they will try to play games and lobby for changes that benefit them most. They don't care really about how good these regulations are going to be. They care about whether they're going to win or not, right? And that is always going to be the case. So Simmons says, as a result, the power unit for this upcoming year is not what I would have liked it to be. The FIA rejected a proposal to allow designers to generate energy from the car's front axle to help make up for losses incurred by removing the MGUH due to objections from one team. So this is the key paragraph that we'll now go on to discuss. With the 26 power unit, the FIA said it wanted to involve the manufacturers more. Ultimately, I think it's like when you get a committee to design a racehorse, you end up with a camel. So that's where that comment is coming from. I think that has happened a little bit because one of the briefs of the 26 engine was to remove the MGUH, because that was something that certainly improved the efficiency of the engines massively, but it was quite complex. The reason why they did this, as he describes, is that the new manufacturers, the Audis, the potentially Porsches, even Cadillac say that they'll make their own General Motors engine at some point soon, Ford as well. They came in large parts because the FIA said, okay, we're going to get rid of the MGUH. That's the part which recovers energy from the heat emitted from the turbo. That's going to go because it's a complex piece of kit. It's not so road relevant, but it was very important to the efficiency of these engines since 2014. That's now gone. So as Simmons was saying, if you remove that energy source, but if everything else stays the same, we've increased the power of the electric motor and stuff. So what are we going to do? Where are we getting the energy from? The idea was to replace that with recovering energy from the front axle because, of course, these cars are rear-wheel drive, so they recover energy from the MGUK on the rear axle. but they could also have made that possible on the front axle as well. There was a bit of debate about this though, because he says if you did that, everything balanced out quite nicely, you weren't short of energy, you could have a lot more electrification on the car. But unfortunately, because of this committee approach to things, one team, I wonder who, was very much against front axle recovery. I think the president of the FIA at the time, that was Jean Todt, thought we were talking about four-wheel drive. So we are talking quite a long time ago now, right? But these regulations have been in process for, well, really much 4 years. We've known what these regs are going to look like, to be honest. So we're talking quite a while ago, but now it's all coming to the surface how these things played out behind the scenes, and you can maybe understand where some of these advantages or disadvantages are coming from. So Jean Todt thought we were talking about four-wheel drive. They weren't. They were just talking about where the energy recovery was happening from. Maybe drive once you're on the straight, but certainly not in the corners, so not a four-wheel drive car. Because of this sort of very democratic approach, one of the times where democracy is not good, because maybe he would like the FIA to be governed in a different way, or has just general views on that, we ended up with this camel. We ended up with a power unit that is sparse on energy. Okay, there are ways around it, but they are not good ways around it. And that is also an interesting comment, because over the last few days we have seen much talk on Mercedes pushing the limits of the power unit from a compression ratio perspective, because if you can make your power unit, your internal combustion engine stronger, you can regenerate more energy or use more of that energy for the battery, for the electrical motors potentially as well. So that's indicative that Simmons believes the way to do it was the way that he was proposing. That didn't happen because one team, one manufacturer were vehemently against it. Therefore, it was thrown out, and as a result, we're now in a situation where the power units don't really work very well, and the only workarounds are kind of grey area and potentially massively problematic. He does say the aero, the chassis, the active aero is a good step forward, he thinks. So he quite likes that side of things, but I wouldn't say the 26 power units ended up the way that I wanted. So who is this one team? As he says, one team was very much against front axle recovery. So what can we theorize here? Well, what we know first of all is that the MGU-H was removed because the new manufacturers were coming in as a compromise for them. So it's certainly not going to be one of those new manufacturers. It's going to be an established manufacturer, because those manufacturers were the ones that were using the MGU-H successfully, so it was then taken away. You're not going to listen to the new guys as well, right? That's a big benefit those new guys coming in got. So if there's going to be one manufacturer that says, no, we're not happy with that, and as a result it doesn't happen, it's not going to be an Audi or a Ford or whatever. It's also worth keeping in mind at this time, Honda are on their way out of the sports, really. They've obviously come back in now, but that was not clear that was the case at the time. So really we have two candidates here, right? Really it is either Mercedes or it is Ferrari, because those are the two key manufacturers that also manage lots of teams. Their engine goes to lots of teams. They have lots of power, as we know in the sports. Now, I asked ChatGPT what it thought about this. Often it will sit on the fence and say, I can't possibly come up with an answer to that. But no, it says it thinks it's Mercedes. This does make some level of sense, right? Because at this time, when this objection was coming through, Mercedes have reason to oppose front axle recovery. They already lost the MGU-H, where they were pretty dominant, right? I think this is the point. When these conversations were happening, Mercedes were considered, and had been for several years, the dominant power unit manufacturer. So if the FIA is going to say, all right, we're going to get rid of the MGU-H, which led to a substantial amount of Mercedes success during that time period, it's understandable that if they were to then say, okay, sure, go ahead and do that, but we are not happy with you also making up for that in some other way. We will find our own way to make up for that disadvantage. And given the resources and the power and the depth that Mercedes high-performance powertrains have, if you're going to take away one of the key elements of energy recovery, and then you're going to let the team struggle with a camel of an engine, Mercedes presumably might have felt confident that, okay, we can do that better than anybody else can because we have more resources, we have more staff, effectively, we have the experience in this domain, we will find the grey areas, the loopholes, whatever, to make this happen. And now we are starting to see that come out publicly, as we have seen in recent days, right, with all this compression ratio talk happening. So, look, these are conversations that started half a decade ago, and here we are today with conversations. Look, it could be Ferrari, I don't know, but it would be an absolute shock if it's not one of those two. And I think Mercedes are the most likely of the teams, given the political dynamic at the time, that would have said to the FIA, you're not doing this front axle recovery thing. And Pat Simmons would say, well, who cares? Let's do it anyway. It's better for the regs. But apparently the FIA were like, okay, well, we'll compromise on that. And it's led us with a camel, according to Pat Simmons. So we'll see what turns up on track next year. The point is that Mercedes may have felt politically that, all right, if the MGUH is going, we now have a stronger hand here to force through what we want to happen. And, well, I mean, Mercedes are an important power unit manufacturer. The FIA may well have bent a little bit much to their will, which could cause problems when it comes to all these years down the line. We're turning up to 2026. Total Wolf says Mercedes are very much on track with their targets. So, look, who knows what comes next? Intrigued to your thoughts, as ever, in the comment section below. Hit the like button if you enjoyed. Subscribe if you're new. Take care, and I'll see you next time.